All right. Any questions about that? No. I didn't do it, by the way. Someone else did it. I don't know who did it. They sent it to me. I thought it was terrible enough that it was kind of funny. Anyway, have I been pwned? Who's used this before? Okay, that's good. It's going to be easy. Who's been in a data breach? Hey, I've been in, I think, 36 in have I been pwned. Can anyone beat 36? Incidentally, this is more like golf, right? Like lower is better. We're up to 974 data breaches at the moment. There's a rate of breaches that I can't keep up with, if I'm honest. There's another half dozen this morning that are pretty major, I'll talk about in a moment. But we are up to 17.5 billion records, which is quite substantial. And regularly I get sent data, and I do these talks, and people are like, well, where does it come from? So I think there's a bit of an impression among a lot of people that, well, the data obviously comes from the Russian cybercriminals, right? Like, this is where it all comes from. And this was a bad guy. This is Yevgeny Bogachev. He created the Zeus malware and obviously ended up on one of these posters. And we're seeing a lot of like nasty financially motivated things like ransomware come out of corners of the world like Eastern Europe. But most of the data that goes into have I been pwned is from much more, I guess, I was going to say benign sources. They're obviously not benign because they've broken into systems and taken data, but perhaps less scary sources. And what I wanted to go through today is just sort of some of the motivations of what's driving people to execute these data breaches and then dump stuff publicly. And when I say dump publicly, it's wild how easily accessible a lot of this data is. And I'll give you an example of this. This is Adido. So Adido is a Dutch telco. And they had a data breach. You'll see the term shiny hunters there at the top. We'll talk a bit about them. They had a data breach that ended up in have I been pwned only a couple of months ago. It's got 6 million people in it. Now, the Netherlands has got 18 million people. So this is a third of the population. So this is kind of like our Medibank or our Optus in terms of scale. So this data breach happened, executed by shiny hunters. They dumped it on their dark web website. But you don't have to go that far to find the data. Because you can find the data in places like Twitter, X, whatever it is now, Elon's thing. People literally just posting links to data. This link is dead now, which is why it's here. And the thing is like you don't even really have to go looking for it. You can just ask, because you know how people have asked Grok to do a whole bunch of really stupid stuff lately, and it's just like, yeah, here you go. There you go. Like you can literally just ask Grok, where is the data? And there's 6 million Dutch people with all their personal info there. So let's move on to the motives of why hackers are doing this. And I've got 4 different themes I'm going to talk about today. And each one, I've got really noteworthy incidents and a few examples of things I've dealt with directly to try and illustrate it. And I thought we'd start here with Ashley Madison. Anyone remember Ashley Madison data breach? Was anyone in that one? No, that's the right answer. I've got no idea what it is. So it was run by this guy. This is Noel Bitterman. He was the CEO. Ashley Madison still is, the website designed for people who want to have affairs. It's like affairs as a service, right? You go online, you find someone else who wants to have an affair, magic happens, and then here we are. They had a data breach in 2015. More than 30 million people were exposed in that, and it was massive news everywhere. And the data was torrented really, really extensively very early, so loads of people had the data, which means they could do things like stand up data breach search sites, like this. This one's called Trustify, and Trustify looks like have I been pwned, right? You go and put an email address in, and then it goes and it finds that person specifically in the Ashley Madison data breach. Now, when Ashley Madison happened, the attackers announced a month beforehand. They said, we've got all your data, shut down or we're going to dump it, and we all know what happened next. But I had a month to think about it, and I went, it feels like bad things would happen if anybody could just search for anybody on a service like Have I Been Pwned and find they were in Ashley Madison. So I'm going to make sure you can't do that. So Ashley Madison was the first sensitive data breach, I put in have I been pwned. And a sensitive data breach, you can't do this. You can't just put in an email address and find out who's in there. You've actually got to receive an email to that address, verify a token, and then you see the results. These guys didn't care so much because they were ultimately selling reports, and they wanted to let you know whether an email address was in there so that then they could sell you a report. And they marketed it too. Part of the way they marketed it, and look at this through like a privacy lens, right? Think about a lot of this in terms of what it means for personal privacy. They partly marketed it by after you search for someone on Trustify, you find they're in Ashley Madison's, their lives are going to be ruined one way or another, you could then share it on Twitter. Handy little share buttons. I don't know why you're doing that with friends. Now that turned into a complete circus with all sorts of different services being set up out there for people to find their friends, their partners, their other church-going parishioners in some cases in the Ashley Madison data breach. And it led to a media circus as well. Now, I'll give you a bit of example here. This is a local Aussie example, local Sydney example, where a radio station was encouraging people to call up to see if their partner was in the breach, because they could then search a site like Trustify. Now, what could go wrong with this?
I've given you've got his details
we've got his details here, and we've put them into the... I feel like we're on Jerry Springer, man. I feel like because this is weird, because we're putting him into this website right now, and his details have revealed... Put it in. That he's actually on the website, Joe.
Are you serious?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Are you freaking kidding me?
Yeah, no,
These websites are disgusting, and that girl that called before, she should be ashamed of herself.
Yeah. Oh, Joe's gone.
Oh, I don't know if we should have done that.
Yeah, you reckon? No, you shouldn't have done that, because someone's now having the worst day of their life and you facilitated it via your radio program for entertainment purposes. Now, the data was dumped publicly by these guys. This is the Impact team. This is their message. Time's up. Dumped all the data publicly. Now, they've got some moral bases to why they did this. Not just the fact that it's all there for people to have affairs, but things like Ashley Madison being deceitful to their members. It was basically all men, surprise, surprise, and some bots. So they obviously had what is our first motive here, which is an ideological predisposition to the service. So the Ashley Madison hack was ideologically driven. And what I want to do with each of these, I'm going to give you an example of something else, another hack you're probably not aware of, which we've dealt with in Have I Been Pwned, which sort of meets this same motive. And it's a website called moi.ai, where you can create an AI girlfriend. Anyone use this? 0 from 2 so far. So Moi has met sort of an expected, it's not an expected end, it's an expected juncture in its journey, because it's still going, but it exposed 1.9 million people in the data set. And this was about 18 months ago. And as it relates to the ideology of it, the reason the person hacked it was in the message that they sent me, where they said, AI-generated girlfriend website, and you'll see in a moment, the AI generation is a combination of prompts, so you can have discussions, and you could also ask it to create images, which you won't see for reasons that will become obvious in a moment. The person that sent it to me said, have a look at this. It's full of pedos. And I'm like, oh, crap, I really don't like getting these ones. What do you mean? And then you start looking at the data. Now, fortunately, the only thing in there is text. And I'm going to heavily redact everything here, but you'll get a bit of an impression of how this service worked. This is what the main table looked like. And this is what a lot of the data breaches I get look like. They're literally just .SQL files dumped by a tool like SQL Map, which exploits SQL injection vulnerabilities. Usually MySQL databases, they dump it all out. You've probably all seen schemas like this before. ID, phone, timestamp, etc. And then you'd have customers. So you'd have individuals that would end up with records like this. Now, I've redacted the email address, which for some reason is in the phone column. That bugged me just as much as well. Not just as much as some of the things I saw, if I'm honest, but frustrating all the same. So you get an identity in there. It's obviously personally identifiable. It's someone's real email address. Bit of content here. This one is actually a response from the AI assistant. So you can see there's a role attribute. So we have assistants and we have users. So the assistant has sent this message. That's burned some tokens. The role here is a free AI girlfriend. Obviously the goal here is to keep burning tokens, generating stuff, and people ultimately pay for it. This is the sort of thing an assistant sent. I had to look through a lot of stuff in order to find a single thing I could show you that a user said. And I finally found one that was pretty benign. But this is the way the conversation happens, right? It engages. So the user says this, the assistant comes back, and I tell you what, I had to look a lot to find something that the assistant said that I could put on the screen here as well. So it comes back with something like this, and the goal ultimately is to try and not just engage, but to try and generate imagery. This is an AI image generation service. And I had to look a long way again in order to find an image prompt that I could share. And this was about as benign as I could find. And so far, like, none of that's very surprising. And going back to the person's motivations here, again, ideologically driven, and ideology I think we can all agree with, I wanted to try and find content that sort of illustrated clearly, like is this person's argument about it being full of pedos, is it legitimate? Now, I found one example, this is heavily redacted, but you'll see enough for you to go, okay, well, this is, yeah, I see where the guy's going now. So, another Gmail address. This is the prompt. And it's enough for you to go, yep, this is way on the wrong side of anything reasonable or legal. Now, after this data got shared, it went into Have I Been Pwned, and there was a lot of discussion on their Discord channel. And I actually realised a little bit later on, when I was looking at this, why do you have a flag for sexual minors? Like, if you can recognise that that's what it is, such that you can flag it, can't you, like, kick the person out or do something? Apparently not. And I think you'll see why in a moment. The Discord channel had a lot of chatter on. This was an admin here, and I sort of highlighted what I thought was particularly interesting because it ties back to this privacy discussion. See, privacy keeps coming up again and again. Your email and prompt are not going to affect your privacy. Keeping in mind what we just saw, a Gmail address next to a very explicit prompt. Many of our users use burner email if they want maximum privacy, which is fine because we protect user privacy foremost. Incidentally, having a data breach, not a great way of protecting user privacy. I did actually quite like the second last line as well, where part of the argument for privacy is that they're using SSL. So when you put your really nasty descriptions into your browser, it's encrypted all the way to the server before it gets decrypted and stored in plain text. Anyway, they go on. Nothing in the recent data breach can be linked to anyone's identity. Nothing can be linked to anyone's identity. Because anyone can create an account, anyone can click on a link by accident. How you type in those prompts by accident, I'm not so sure. It's extremely common for emails to be made public. Now, as soon as I hear something like, nothing can be linked to anyone's identity, it's like, oh, I bet it can. I bet I can figure it out. So I went back to here, and I found the guy on LinkedIn. Immediately. The reason I've so heavily redacted it is the IRL consequences for someone like that to be linked to a prompt like that are massive. And there is a correct way of dealing with this, which we did, which is to channel it through law enforcement. So very coincidentally, my wife Charlotte and I were literally sitting in San Francisco the day we were going to have a visit with the FBI. The morning we were looking at this. So we had a great chat. Multiple law enforcement agencies ended up with this data. Multiple law enforcement agencies said they couldn't take it. And one of the kind of disappointing aspects of this is they said, we can't take it because if there are IRL abusers in here and we've had the data and we didn't do anything with it, the lawyers aren't very happy with the prospect of that. Which is a bit of a sad place to be in. So anyway, I found the guy on LinkedIn, But the other part of the argument that was made on Discord was, well, how do you know it's their email address? Like, anyone's email address could be just entered into the website. But that's not how it works, because you might be thinking already, well, hang on a moment, like, don't you normally like verify your email address and then you can go and do stuff? It's like, yeah, you can. Here's how it works. You go here, you sign up. I just signed up with the Mailinator address. They're public email boxes, disposable email. Signed up, I got this email, came to Mailinator, you click the link, and now you have your AI girlfriend. So you have to prove that you control the email address before you can do anything under that identity. Now, whether you're doing a sleazy, dodgy AI girlfriend website or a financial application, it always works pretty much the same way. And I kind of wondered, because we have so much data, that 7.5 billion records is really, really useful for looking at large data sets and figuring out where things intersect. I wonder if we took AI and we took the LinkedIn data breach 12 years earlier, I wonder how many people would be in each one with the same email address. Because you know people are creating LinkedIn accounts with their real email address. Turns out there are 13,000 people there. So at least 13,000 people use their real email address on the AI Girlfriend website. Now, to be clear, there's a lot of stuff on AI which does not fit that child sexual abuse material definition. It fits adult content, which might not be to your liking. It might be a bit weird to be talking to an AI bot about it, but would fit the legal status. But still 13,000, and that was, the LinkedIn data breach was 12 years before AI. So it'd inevitably be much, much bigger. Of the 1.9 million email addresses in the service, 24% were already in Have I Been Pwned from one breach or another. So we would have had, let's call it maybe 400,000 people had used the same email address for this service as what they had for other online services. So probably their real primary address. Now, after a lot of data breaches, there's like a second order effect. There's something else that happens with more criminal activity afterwards, which is what happened with this one. Same thing happened with Ashley Madison. People are in a data breach and then they start getting extorted, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? And there's probably a little bit of you that goes, screw those guys. You know, like maybe some of them actually deserve to get extorted. There is a happy ending to this whole thing. There's aspects to this that worked out well, but I'll start by showing this. I found it fascinating to watch the Discord chatter, and it's like everyone's talking about AI stuff, one way or another now. Watching the Discord chatter about AI-generated adult material. Some of it legal, per the prompts before, some of it clearly not legal. And I'd constantly see messages like this. And I'd see messages like, how can something that's in your head be illegal? If it's just in your head and you type it in, how can it be illegal? And people are somehow trying to rationalise this in their brain. The good news is, turns out it is illegal, and people are getting picked up for it. Some of that data from AI, perhaps some of it that we provided to agencies, helped catch people. It was a good outcome. So, ideologically motivated data breaches. Go on to another motivation. This is a friend of mine, Kevin Mitnick, was a friend of mine. He passed away a few years ago. Has anyone heard of Kevin? All right, some of you will know Kevin, know of Kevin. In case you haven't heard of Kevin, I'll play you a very, very short video clip where he was explaining some of the things that happened in his earlier life.
Well, the government obviously labeled me, with these terms like terrorist, and they locked me up in solitary confinement because they said I could whistle into a telephone and launch nuclear weapons.
That'd be an awesome party trick, wouldn't it? Like, can you imagine if you had the ability to do that? Kevin was notorious in the 80s. And in the 80s, he was doing a lot of phone phreaking, breaking into phone networks, playing tones into phones to make them do things they shouldn't. It was pre-internet days. It was before particularly governments really understood this cybersecurity space. So they went pretty heavy-handed on him. He did change his identity and go on the run for a very long time and then end up in solitary confinement for 6 months. So he did have some stories. But one of the things we'd often talk about is he'd say, look, his motivations weren't for malice. He was curious. He was a curious kid. He was just kind of looking around, seeing what was out there, being, I guess, like a kid in real life, but doing it in a digital space. And I found this great quote of his that sort of explained his motives. He said, "The primary goal was intellectual curiosity and the seduction of adventure." I thought that's kind of a nice term, isn't it? Seduction of adventure. I mean, it's a nice term for a criminal act, but his motives were very, very clear. And this is sort of this second motive I want to talk about, curiosity and adventure, because we see this time and time again in data breaches. We see this being the reason that kids in particular are going out and hacking things. And I had a breach a few years ago, this is back in 2015 now, of VTech. Someone reached out to me and sent me nearly 5 million records of VTech users. Now, VTech is a Hong Kong toy maker, and they make these little tablets things here. You can join them up to the internet, create an account, and this guy managed to find security vulnerabilities that exposed the data. And I don't think that his intent was malice at all. It's just he found this stuff. Found it sitting there, and he poked and he prodded, and eventually he sucked out all the data and he sent it to Lorenzo at Motherboard, and Motherboard, Lorenzo, sent it to me, and it went into Have I Been Pwned. And when Lorenzo was interviewing the guy said he thought the company would never listen to him and might have even tried to cover the breach up. And this is another one of the problems we keep having, where you find curious kids poking around the internet, finding interesting stuff, and when they do, they're like, what do I do with it? Because so many times, kids are worried, particularly kids, but geez, even for me, it can be so hard to get in touch with an organisation and say, hey, I've got millions of records of your data, you need to pay attention to it. Now, that's not to justify what he did, but I can see his reasoning, I can see the path that leads him there. Not malice, curiosity. Here's a good example of the way organisations respond that makes curious kids do things like that. These are cloud pets. They're messages you can hug. Now, these are IoT teddy bears. And the way the IoT teddy bear works, you see each of them's got like a little heart, that's an LED. And then in their paw, they've got a button. They've also got a microphone and a speaker, so they're a listening device you put in your house. Now, the kids can record a message into the teddy bear, it goes up into the cloud, it stays there, and then it comes down into like a grandparent's phone in a remote location. And then they record a message and it goes back up into the cloud, and then it comes down to the teddy bear, and they press the paw because the light's flashing, they know there's a message, and it plays a message, which is cool, right? I thought it was quite funny. They used to, because of America, they used to do discounts for military service people. So the military could get the listening device cheap to put in their house. Anyway, they got breached, and the data, again, went public, went to Have I Been Pwned. And a journalist I was working with was trying to get in touch with the organisation to say, look, we've got millions of your pets' email addresses, your pets' owners' email addresses. And this was the guy they were trying to contact. This is Mark Myers. He's the CEO of Cloud Pets. Cloud Pets has now disappeared. But the journalist, after it went into Have I Been Pwned, and after people are getting notifications and it gets all this press, finally gets in touch with the guy. And again, looking at it through the lens of having trouble getting in touch with organisations, the CEO said, we did have a reporter try to contact us multiple times. You don't respond to some random person about a data breach. But it's random people that find the data breaches. It's random people that create the data breaches. So no, that's wrong. You do respond. And when you don't respond, that's when things go really wrong. That's not to justify the actions of the person who took the data. It's still a breach. It's still a criminal act. But it was made so much worse by the fact that we just couldn't get in touch with the company. Now, usually when we see breaches like this, they're committed by people like this. It's a 19-year-old. This was in the news. This is only a couple of weeks old, this one. This guy's Matthew Lane. So Matthew hacked PowerSchool about 18 months ago. So PowerSchool does a bunch of EDU-related stuff. It was a really, really major breach. 62 million people. The data never went public. It's never in Have I Been Pwned. But not only did he breach the organisation, potentially through curiosity and the sense of adventure and everything, but after he got the 62 million people, he successfully ransomed them for $2.85 million. American dollars, the expensive ones. So suddenly we're starting to pivot to a separate set of motivations. He also got 4 years in prison as a result, and he recorded this just before going to prison.
I was just addicted to that. I was addicted.
Matthew Lane says that addiction started when he was just 14 years old. He wanted to be able to cheat on gaming platforms like Roblox.
You know, like you see other people, they're like, they got like crazy stuff in game, or they're, you know, killing you over and over again, like with like some crazy stuff. And like, you're like, how are they doing that? I want to do that. It's a very toxic and edgy corner of the internet.
But like others, learning how to hack games opened a darker door where he could exploit online vulnerabilities for profit. And he's far from alone. An ABC News investigation reveals the average age of arrest for a cybercrime in this country is now 19 years old.
So, and he was 19 then. So that's the average age for arrest, and he'd been doing this since he was 14. So roughly half the people, let's say it's a median, who cares? You get the idea. Half the people involved in this, by the time they get arrested, have been doing it for many, many years, since they were kids. And very often it starts in gaming communities as well. It's not that games are the thing that causes them to then become hackers, but games, they foster that environment of curiosity and adventure, to use Kevin's terms. But it very quickly pivots into, I'm sick of losing, I'm going to install some cheats. I'm sick of this person always knocking me off in whatever first-person shooter or whatever it was, I'm going to get DDoS. I'm now going to go into hacking communities. I'm now going to start trading data breaches. And before you know it, a bunch of these kids end up just like Matthew. So Matthew was part of this Shiny Hunters collective that you saw earlier on in the Adido tweet. And Shiny Hunters is a dark web website where they post their victims. So this is what they posted for Adido. They said, we've got almost 21 million records. Very often you see the term records, and records is like this massive number. And we've all built relational databases before. How many records you have is not necessarily how many people are impacted. So that 21 million records was 6 million people. They're putting out scary warnings like this. They tried to reason with them. You don't want a national crisis. It's only a few cents per person. We'll negotiate. Do the right thing. It's almost like they're the good guys, isn't it? It's a little bit mafioso. So it's a nice website you got here. Shame if something was to happen to it. So you get guys like that pivoting from where it was curious adventure and all the other sort of much more benign stuff, and then suddenly you're into a very different motivation. You're into money. Financial motivation. And particularly guys like Matthew and this Shiny Hunters crew are now starting to get very good at doing stuff like this. This is just a small snippet of what was on their website a couple of days ago. I almost updated this morning because I think it was over breakfast, they dumped 6 more, including 7-Eleven, Zara, and a bunch of other names I didn't recognise. So I've now got to go and trawl through hundreds of gigabytes worth of data and figure out what in there is actually of relevance to, have I been pwned? But every one of these says, final warning, pay or leak. So this is the new breed of ransomware today. Remember when ransomware used to be your files got encrypted, right? So your files are getting encrypted, you'd be like, oh no, everything's got a strange file extension. Oh, there's a text file here about where I send Bitcoin to. And then I get a key and I unlock the files and I know the product worked because my files are unlocked. Job done. But now, ransomware is attacks on confidentiality. They've got your data, pay the money, or they'll leak it. And once they leak it, it ends up everywhere. But if you pay the money, they'll delete it honest. Right? So you see the problem, right? You see the problem with this business model. Now, if you take someone like McGraw-Hill, they didn't pay, so they ended up here. 40 million Salesforce records. So you can now go and download, and incidentally, I'm not encouraging people to do this, but what is now publicly available is their data along with terabytes of data from other organisations. And a little bit like we saw with Adido in the earlier tweet, Once that data breach happens, it spreads really quickly. Spreads over Twitter, especially spreads over places like Telegram. It's very easy to find data like this on Telegram channels. This is a collection of some of the largest stuff that Shiny Hunters has dumped, even just very recently. Look at that top one, Zen Business. 801 gigabytes zipped. So that expanded to about 2 terabytes worth of data. So we've been putting a lot of work into speeding up our data processing tooling. It took about a day and a half to go through there and figure out how many email addresses are in it. So huge volumes of data which get leaked, but then lead to these, as I said before, second order consequences. So consequences like this was immediately after the incident with McGraw-Hill. So someone has taken that data and is now sending extortion emails to the people in the breach. Now keep in mind, this is a very EDU-centric service as well. So a lot of this is going to students and teachers and things like this. And this is like an age-old classic extortion email. It repeats a little bit of information that somebody knows already. You got your email address. You were in the McGraw-Hill data breach, and people are going, oh yeah, geez, I did use that service. So they hear something that is familiar to them, which creates confidence in the extortionist. And then they go on and say, look, we installed an exploit in your devices, got access to your microphone, your camera. Among other things, we discovered that you frequently visit adult websites and watch explicit videos, and we've created videos of you pleasuring yourself. There will be a portion of people who receive this who are like, oh crap, because it will resonate with a portion of them. And then a portion of them will pay the ransom. And again, it's financially motivated, but it's the second order. I don't think that the senders of this are the shiny hunters who are doing the initial breaches and dumping them on the dark web website. This does not match their MO at all. It's not consistent with their behaviours. So you've now got cyber criminals creating the first act, and then other cyber criminals coming along and taking that data and then doing other nasty things with it. And the whole thing just gets worse and worse. Now, on a more light-hearted note, going on another motivation. Has anyone seen this movie? All right, so this movie is hilarious. 2014, Seth Rogen, James Franco, this is The Interview. And the basic premise of The Interview is that these guys go to North Korea in order to conduct an interview with Kim Jong-un, and the CIA has a little chat to them beforehand and goes, can you take him out? And then they're like, what do you mean? Like, take him out to dinner, take him out to a movie? And like, no, take him out. And they go to North Korea, and insanity ensues, as you'd expect from a comedy with Seth Rogen, and then some very interesting cyber-related things happen. But to put it in a context, I'll show you a small clip so you get a sense of the tone and the way the dear North Korean leader is positioned.
Oh, excuse me.
Did you just shart?
No, I didn't. It was a dead camera guy. It wasn't me.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kim Jong-un has just pooed in his pants.
Now, based on what you know of North Korea, how do you think this went down there? Not so good. He wasn't happy about it, so they hacked Sony Pictures. Which is wild, right? Like a nation state hacking an entertainment company because their leader looked a bit silly in a comedy show. But this is real. I mean, it is literally nation state sponsored hacking, not for money, which North Korea does time and time and time again, but for revenge, which is our next topic. So revenge features over and over and over again in data breaches. And I wanted to find a really good example. Like, what's a really good example of revenge in a data breach that I could show you here? And I did a little bit of research, and I realized that not only did I have a data breach that was a great illustration of revenge, but the data breach itself was literally of a revenge website. So there was, doesn't exist anymore, a website called Get Revenge on Your Ex, which does exactly what it sounds like it does. It also had another website called Masters of Revenge, and both Get Revenge on Your Ex and Masters of Revenge were two different front ends that sat on the same back-end database. Now maybe there's some SEO or something and they just have this one, so it's a bit clear if you're after your ex, and this one if you're after your neighbour. But be that as it may, there's 79,000 people in this data breach. This is what Get Revenge on Your Ex looked like. Very high quality design effort on this one. Has your ex screwed you over? Don't suffer in silence. These are some of the revenge products. You could, this is like literally revenge as a service, right? This is everything as a service. You could send letters. You could send voodoo dolls. We'll come back to them. You could send packages to your victims. And we'll talk about what was in that package in just a moment. Because it's like every other website today, they've got partners they work with. You could hide your IP for obvious reasons if you're in the revenge industry. There's spy data, or, and this one's got a warning, you can get a really hardcore, you can get a high priest. You can buy spells to get revenge on your ex. Now, again, this was just one front end. The other front end was Masters of Revenge. Now, Masters of Revenge had multiple different parties. This actually scrolled through on a little carousel. I stopped it on Neighbour for reasons that will become obvious in a moment. And what particularly took me with this one is the promise of anonymity. Because again, every time I see something like this, a claim that we know to be false, it's like, I really want to figure out if this is true now. So can you get revenge on people via a website like that and still have anonymity? Let's have a look at their data breach. 81 files here, 173 megabytes worth of data. And because it is the year 2026, the right way to figure out how to deal with this was to dump it in OpenClaw. And what I really wanted to know was, in amongst all of this data, was there a good story? And it found an absolute belter, which is what I want to share now, because we have all of the data. So, there was a lady using Masters of Revenge who was a bit interested in the service because clearly she had a vendetta she needed to fulfill. So this lady, this is Paula. And everything else about Paula I've fabricated in terms of data, but I will use her real name for reasons you'll see later. She was a bit worried about the phone call she wanted them to make. Because what about the police? Could they be aware that Cuddles for You, when it shows over the bank statement, is actually Master of Revenge? Now, the relevance of Cuddles for You is, let's say hypothetically you've ever bought anything from an online adult store. What's on your credit card statement? Anyone know? Yeah, good answer. All right. It's not going to be the name that you think it is. It's going to be something else which looks much more benign, because it wouldn't look good if your credit card statement said Masters of Revenge. So they had effectively a front company called Cuddles for You, so that once your bank statement came through, you didn't look like you were harassing someone. Now, the fascinating thing about this service is that the customer service was really good. So you'll see that every time someone asks a question, they get a very fast reply that's very useful. And the admin comes back and says, 10 years we've been running it. No one has ever been traced. All the products are classed as domestic dispute, which means no criminal activity and therefore no investigation. This doesn't really pass the sniff test, does it? Like so far. So it's just a domestic dispute. Go nuts and harass. So Paula wasn't completely sure. She came back again, said, has anyone, caps all hers, ever been traced? I know you say it's impossible, but I'm so worried in case she finds out it's me. She's in a small village, it would ruin me and my family. And it turns out it's a neighbour that she wants to target. Now, you would think that now is the point where Paula would realise the potential impact on her life, because she's literally just spelled it out there, and stop. But she got a reply. No one has ever been traced. You know it's going to come now, don't you? Caller ID, internet browsing. The SMS messages are sent using a SIM card changed on a monthly basis. So you know how you go to an airport sometimes? They just hand out a SIM card when you arrive at a foreign country? So apparently that's what they were using. They were just getting the SIM cards and then using those to send abusive messages as part of Revenge as a Service. So Paula goes and signs up. Now again, remember all the promises of anonymity? This is what's in the database. She signs up and she makes a £1.97 purchase, which turns out is an abusive SMS message that she sends to herself to test it because she's very cautious. She wants to know the product is quality, obviously, before she starts abusing people with it. Think of all the PII that's in here. Name, address, IP address, email. Like all of this is going to line up, right, and point to her. Now, because we have her address, we know exactly where she is in Scotland. She's here. We know exactly where her victim is. She's here. She's like literally over the road. So Paula has gone to ransomware, that's a different thing, ransomware as a service. She's gone to revenge as a service to start targeting this neighbour. So she starts targeting this neighbour with malicious text messages. It seems kind of benign, they're just text messages, but she keeps going, and before too long, there's a police officer involved. He's been investigating the number. This is obviously the number that the SMS is going from. I'm worried that it may somehow be traced to me. So her worst fears from the earlier messages are now coming true. But again, good customer service. Police regularly try and track down the source. They've been trying for many a year, smiley face. Every so often we change the SIM card over. There is no way on the planet for you to be traced. Now, you've seen all of her personal data already. Again, only the name is real. Everything else we're seeing here, I've made up, including the IP on every one of these transactions. She keeps buying more and more stuff. Now, all the £1.72 ones, a lot of those got stripped out for OpenClaw for some reason or other. But then she starts spending big. She's spending like £17 on something, £29 on something, and it just keeps going and going over a long period of time until eventually the police send a message. So the police start investigating this, and again, this is just what OpenClaw pulled out of all of the data. Several letters being sent to a person, Sarah. So that is her real name, and again, you'll see why in a moment. So Sarah was the recipient of all of these things. And the police officer is obviously very concerned about it because this woman's being harassed. And you know how customer service was like so responsive the whole time to Paula? Turns out not so much for police. So they just wouldn't reply. So Paula keeps going and she's sending more and more stuff to Sarah. And eventually she goes for more customer service. I've heard the person I've sent stuff to has hired a private detective. Is there anyway the voodoo doll? So this is one of the big spends, right? So she's literally sent a voodoo doll across the road using an anonymous service. Now, because it's a paying customer, she gets good service. You rest easy. There's no way for things to be traced back to you. There's no way you can be traced, and therefore, et cetera, et cetera. So you keep getting these reassurances. So she keeps going. Like she's sending more and more stuff. She starts using her husband's credit card to buy stuff as well. I don't know if she's like trying to randomise it a little bit, so maybe she won't get caught. So she keeps going, sending more stuff, and she obviously becomes quite brazen about it because at one point in time, she becomes really casual and she's like, look, I'm just checking on the tub of urine. Has it arrived? So now we know what's in the box, right? I ordered it roughly 3 weeks ago. I haven't heard if it was successfully sent. She's a paying customer, so she gets a good response. Completely overlooked it. Our mistake. I will personally make sure this gets sent first thing in the morning. Now, when I read my tub of urine, has it arrived, and the guy's like, I will personally make sure of this. The things you learn on the internet. And because it keeps going and going, eventually Sarah reaches out. And she's quite upset. She's got 3 young children. She's been receiving mail, text, phone calls. She received pants, a voodoo doll, and several other letters, including the latest which contained a urine sample, which we've already established. Police are aware, person's tormenting my family. Like she's obviously really distressed, as you would be if you kept getting harassed. And she doesn't know that it's the person literally over the other side of the road. But she's not a paying customer. So she gets nothing. Nothing comes back. And then Paula just keeps going and going and going, sending more and more stuff until finally she stops. And we now know why she stopped. She's in the press. She got sentenced to 250 hours unpaid community service, which seems reasonable given the circumstances. And I actually ended up at this story because originally OpenClaw had found a much more recent post by someone where someone had said, hey, admin, go and have a look in the news because that story I just showed you, that's the Daily Record website, that story is up there in the news and paying customers had discovered that maybe they're not so anonymous. Obviously the site is not safe and anonymous. And what I think is hilarious, just purely from the privacy side of things again, when we look at all these different incidents and data breaches we've talked about, is the brazenness with which people still treat the personal data, because the admin comes back and says the reason all this happened is because she printed the receipts. Not because they stored all the data somewhere that ultimately the data breach happened after all this anyway. So I don't know eventually how they caught it. But isn't it wild that all of this information sits there with IP addresses, phone numbers, home addresses, everything that you could possibly need to tie it back to this individual, and people still operate as though everything's anonymous. And whether it's this or some of the other websites you saw before where people are using their real email addresses to go and do crazy things, I think it's just kind of wild how much all of this ultimately comes back to bite you. And maybe like one last thought to leave here is imagine as you progress that everything you do online does get traced back to you, unless you're really, really conscious about what you're doing. VPNs and all the rest of it. It's just wild how much ultimately ties back to you as an individual. Okay, on that note, I've deliberately left a bit of time for some questions. I know there's some kind of strange things in there as well. Does anyone have any questions about this or data breaches? And incidentally, if you're like, I've got to go and find this website now, they're both gone. So if you want to send any of those things to anybody, you will have to find another means of doing it. Any questions? Eve?
Were there any trends about which countries or which populations were using the revenge sites more than others?
So any trends about populations or countries who are using a revenge site? I didn't look at that. It'd be a good question because that's the sort of thing that obviously AI is very good at aggregating. They were UK-based, so obviously this lady was based in Scotland. At some point in time there was a mention of Manchester, so I guess it was like northern UK. I don't know, because the mind boggles, doesn't it? Like if you, because you're thinking this through, aren't you? If I'm in Australia and I want to send a vial of urine to someone, how do you do it? I don't know how they outsource that. But it would be interesting to get that trend. There was another question up the back.
Yeah, I was just wondering what made you want to start a project like this?
What made me want to start a project like this? So I started Have I Been Pwned in December 2013. If I'm honest, I started because I didn't like my job. So I was working for Pfizer. I spent 14 years at Pfizer. And everyone knows who Pfizer is now because we've had COVID and vaccines. But back then, everyone was like, I don't know who they are. It's like, well, do you know what Viagra is? Like, yeah, that's what we do. So Pfizer is the maker of Viagra and Lipitor and Zoloft. They were, when I started this, the world's 6th largest company. And I worked there for probably 8 or so years as a developer. And then they did this thing that many of you have probably had before where they're like, hey, you know, you're a good developer. If you want your career to progress, you have to stop doing that and be a manager. I was like, okay, it's more money. So we'll do that. But I wasn't writing code. So one of the things I was trying to do was get the organization to be more cloud-centric. So this was thinking back, I guess, 14 years ago, probably, where we're moving a lot of stuff to cloud. I was trying to push a lot of Azure stuff within the organization. I wasn't writing code, so I was like, hey, I'm just going to write a data breach aggregation service. I was doing a lot of InfoSec stuff already. I had the Adobe data breach. It's about 150 million records in there and a few others. And I created the site. And I gave it a stupid name because I didn't think anyone would use it. And then it just kind of escalated. So it was a very accidental thing. But it was, I guess, just maybe it was a little bit like Kevin. It was driven a little bit out of curiosity and a sense of adventure. Yeah?
Has there been ever a data breach
Yeah, so has there ever been a data breach where I have to think about how I handle it and what, you mean like a moral or an ethical sort of?
Well, just like, you know, security being like, how did they get that? Maybe really reflect that.
Look, I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you said that was the Ashley Madison stuff, in terms of how I handled it, for the very reason that you saw with like the Trustify stuff. My worry was, I don't want, and you know what it's going to be. It's going to be, I don't want some guy to have been on there, found himself and have a been pwned, and then his wife comes home and like have a been pwned up on the screen and he's self-harmed or something like that. Like that was the thing I was really worried about. In terms of like, I guess, sophistication and complexity, one interesting thing, someone asked me just before this, one of the volunteers, they're like, you know, we're seeing AI and data breaches and so on. Is it leading to more breaches? Those shiny hunters examples I gave before, a lot of these guys and their kids, like Matthew Lane, they're either adult teenagers or child teenagers, they're socially engineering people via voice. They're literally vishing. So they're calling up people in places like 7-Eleven and Zara, socially engineering them into ultimately stealing things like Salesforce credentials, getting into Salesforce instances and dumping it all. And I think one of the interesting things there is that like this isn't sophisticated. These are either children or very young adults, low technical sophistication, clever social engineering, and they've found a pattern that works and they just keep repeating it over and over and over again. And they've been doing this now for probably about 3 months. If they keep doing it, they'll be arrested, like without a doubt. It's just a question of how long they go for.
Have the Australian government ever responded in a similar way to the American government, where you've tried to give them important or relevant, sensitive data, and they've said, sorry, we don't want to get our hands dirty?
Has the Australian government ever responded like the US government and said, we don't want to get our hands dirty with sensitive data? So I don't want to throw any individual governments under the bus because it's very hard being in a law enforcement agency, first of all, because your funding is always limited. Second of all, being in a cybersecurity capacity. So the challenges that they're dealing with is when, let's say it's the AFP locally, when they're looking for budget to try and do things like youth prevention to stop kids like Matthew Lane going down the wrong path, they're trying to take money out of the same pool as the folks trying to stop kids from beating up people or stealing your car or doing IRL crimes that are violent. And they find it enormously hard to get funding and support. So I think I say that mostly to say in their defence, they're really, really tightly constrained. What I do know is any time I talk to any law enforcement agency about anything related to child sexual abuse material, I do always get the right people very quickly. The difficulty is in what data they can actually take and act on. It was just interesting that one particular country on the other side of the world reached out and asked for that AI data, which I was very happy about. Other countries were interested to talk about it, and then as soon as technical people like most of us in here go and talk to the lawyers to make sure they can deal with it, then they're like, no, it's basically, it's almost like it's too hot to handle, which is a shame. Yeah.
How do you navigate that I guess, yourself, like, morally? It would obviously be hard for you where the government's like, no, we don't want to touch that, but you don't want to expose or that thing you said. Is that a very hard thing to do sometimes?
Yeah, how do I deal with it morally in terms of governments not wanting to touch it? To be clear as well, stuff like that is really quite rare, where there's every data breach, most data breaches, happen as a result of some sort of criminal action. Law enforcement is usually involved in many of these anyway, particularly for any larger organisations. Where it gets sticky is what happens if the content itself may be illegal. And then the question is, where is it illegal? There is a data breach in there related to marijuana. Now, depending on where you are in the world, that's either legal or illegal. That is the sort of thing where it's not going to worry me too much about passing it on. Obviously, anything CSAM related is very clear. Anything spyware related, sometimes I have a chat. There's a lot of spyware data breaches and have been pwned. So if you're not familiar with the term spyware, it's very often under the guise of parental controls. If you're worried about your children, run this app on their device, particularly on Android devices where you can get a lower level of access, And you will get a copy of all of their photos and all of their text messages and all of this like really, really invasive stuff. And it all gets stored on the cloud of the service offering the spyware. And then it gets used really extensively for stalkers, stalking a partner. So when stuff like that comes up, often I'll have a chat to different agencies. But again, the challenge is always look at, there is data, is it something they can work with? And then, to be honest, a lot of the moral challenge is, this is a service operating somewhere, there's the personal identifiable information of a whole bunch of people in there. What's my legal position if I hand it over? So we have dedicated digital lawyers, not working for us, with a firm we go to, and we're like, look, hey, we've got this situation. Often we get requests from law enforcement where we'll get an email that will say, hey, we're the law enforcement from usually more remote parts of the world. We would like all of the information on these 5 email addresses. And we're like, well, sometimes they say it's terrorism related or it's child sexual abuse related. And we're like, well, like what do we do with that? So the approach that we've come up with, and it's from the digital lawyers, is I've said, look, if you want that, you need to get the support of your counterparts in Australia. We're an Australian company, we operate under Australian law. We will respond to legal requests that come through Australia. But yeah, it's hard. Like every day is a little bit of a moral decision at one level or another. There's another question over there somewhere. Oh, there you go. Right. Yeah, so the question is for people who, I got the impression as you were saying that, it's like you have a friend who might have found something. What should your friend do? And look, it's a question that comes up a lot. I get contacted all the time by people who go, look, I've found some serious thing to one extent or another. I can't get the company to listen to me. What do I do? Now, it really kind of depends on what it is. If it's something that's going to be really relevant to have I been pwned and they've already got data, then we're probably going to be involved. So, all right, I'll try and find someone. If it's, ideally, I'd like to try and say to people, if you found a vulnerability but you haven't taken any data, it's not yet a data breach. Don't be the person that makes it a data breach, because that act is something that could land you in a lot of hot water. Number of different options depending where you are in the world, particularly if it's here. There's lots of people we know locally we can talk to. There are CERT, computer emergency response teams, in most countries that can be receptive to this sort of stuff. But even then, we've had the discussion about governments and law enforcement being overburdened and not having enough time. There's obviously trying all the channels you can for the organisation itself. And then there's the last option, which is what I often end up saying to people, which is just leave it. Which sucks, right? Because you're like, yeah, but there's something broken and you're leaking customer data and it's a privacy thing. But what are your options from there? Because you don't want to be the VTech guy. I don't know what happened to that person, but I do know that they figured out who it was, and I do know it went away very quietly, and my guess is it was a child. So yeah, it could have been 16, 17, but it was a minor. And because of the age, they managed to make it go away without a big story. But you just don't want to be that person. It's not worth being that person. Yeah, tell your friend. Any more questions? Got a couple of minutes left, yeah.
Most of the biggest data breaches available online are just aggregations of previous ones. Do you have all this data yourself? Do you consider yourself a data?
Yeah, so the question was, a lot of the biggest data breaches are aggregations of other data breaches. So things like credential stuffing lists, there's stealer log collections. We have a lot of that. Are we a big target? You know, in all honesty, I cannot think of a single time in the last almost 13 years where I feel that we've been very specifically targeted to get access to data. And I think part of that is the only data that we put up in Have I Been Pwned is email addresses. That's it. We have a separate service where we put passwords that are disassociated from email addresses. So if you were to get into Have I Been Pwned's online service, and you were to get everything in Have I Been Pwned, the only thing you'd get from data breaches is email addresses. And you can search for those on the front page, except for the sensitive ones. We have the original source breaches in cold storage, in part because it allows me to do cool talks like this, where I go back and find interesting things. It also helps correlate stuff with other breaches. There's a lot of like really large collections, but also there's a lot of noise in there too. So honestly, I haven't found that we've been a particularly big target for that, and I hope it stays that way. And we get to just keep running this because we're not going to see any less data breaches. Okay, folks, look, I've got a bunch of stickers here. If you'd like to take those, please come and grab them, and thank you very much for coming.